Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where AI business friction meets the long afterlife of Rome. A lot of this episode comes down to the same question in two very different settings. Who gets counted, who gets governed, and who gets to define what continuity actually means? Anthropic has three stories landing at once, and together they sketch a company getting pulled by regulation, enterprise sales, and platform politics. First, Fable is reportedly moving toward a credit system where you only get more usage after submitting government ID. The factual core is straightforward. Access gets tied to KYC. The argument for it is also straightforward. If regulators are moving toward treating some AI access as high risk, identity checks make abuse easier to police. The criticism is less about whether KYC works administratively and more about what it selects for. Mandatory ID chills experimentation, pushes away privacy-sensitive users, and favors institutions over pseudonymous tinkerers. Comparing it to a gun license model tells you the intended framing, not convenience, but controlled access. Second, California cut a statewide Claude deal at a 50% discount with training and support included. That looks like classic land and expand enterprise strategy more than pure public service philanthropy. A discounted statewide contract buys distribution, legitimacy, and a chance to become embedded in procurement workflows before rivals do. Third, Anthropic reportedly renegotiated its Amazon relationship from raw compute hour pricing to token pricing. That matters because token pricing shifts risk. If models get more efficient, the supplier can capture value through usage. If inference gets expensive or feature rollout lags, the buyer starts shopping harder, which Amazon reportedly is doing with OpenAI and its own Nova line. The tension here is easy to miss. Anthropic wants to be a premium model company, but premium models need massive distribution. The more distribution depends on giant partners and public sector buyers, the less freedom there is to ignore their pricing pressure, compliance demands, and impatience. A draft Senate bill from Mark Warner would protect third-party AI agents by imposing a duty of loyalty. In plain English, your travel bot should not secretly steer you toward the provider's commercial partners. That sounds obvious, but it marks a real shift. Search engines and marketplaces have lived with blurry ranking incentives for years. Agents raise the stakes because they don't just present options, they can act for you, which means small ranking biases can become delegated decisions. The bill may stall without bipartisan backing, so nobody should confuse a discussion draft with imminent law. But the direction of travel is clear. Consumer protection for agents is becoming less about model outputs being offensive or wrong and more about agency, disclosure, and conflict of interest. The hard part is enforcement. It's easy to ban undisclosed partner favoritism in theory. It's much harder to prove when an agent's recommendation came from a paid relationship, a subtle training bias, or a genuine quality judgment. That ambiguity is where future liability fights will live. Meta's Applied AI group reportedly banned external coding agents for internal tooling. The stated reason is to keep outside model outputs from contaminating Meta's own training data and creating legal exposure around distillation. That policy makes more sense the bigger the frontier labs get. If your internal codebase starts filling with output generated by a rival model, you can lose provenance. Later, if your own model reproduces similar patterns, proving where the intelligence came from gets messy fast. This is one of those stories where the risk sounds abstract until you notice the second-order effect. The better coding agents get, the more useful they are internally. The more useful they are, the harder they are to avoid. So the firms best positioned to build frontier systems also have the strongest incentive to wall off their internal workflows. That is bad for short-term productivity and arguably good for long-term defensibility. Whether it's actually enforceable inside large organizations is another question. The market-level numbers look contradictory until you separate software economics from hardware bottlenecks. Blended token prices reportedly fell from around $17 per million to about $2 in 2 years, while monthly token volume blew past 30 quadrillion. That price collapse is not a sign. Demand is weak. It is what unlocks demand. A heavy agentic coding workflow can use something like 1,200 times the tokens of a simple chat interaction. Once tokens get cheap enough, entirely new usage patterns become rational. At the same time, AWS raised capacity block prices for NVIDIA GPU rentals by about 20%, even while spot H100 prices fell roughly 40%. That's not necessarily irrational pricing. Spot reflects immediate slack. Capacity blocks price guaranteed access, and large buyers are paying for certainty in a market where waiting can be more expensive than overpaying. Memory tells the same story from another angle. Shortages pushed prices sharply higher, sparked cartel allegations, and reportedly sent firms hunting for rare supplier exceptions. When people say AI is software, this is the reminder that the constraint stack runs through DRAM, packaging, power, and geopolitics. That backdrop makes the CapEx numbers easier to pass. Exponential View pegs AI revenue around $110 billion over the last 12 months, with a run rate near $175 billion, while hyperscaler and neocloud CapEx sits around $848 billion. Those are enormous investments, but if quarterly revenues are already outrunning depreciation, the strongest version of the bull case is at least supported by early operating evidence. The cleaner adoption signal isn't that companies say AI saves time, it's that high-intensity adopters reportedly also outperform on revenue. Cost savings are easy to overstate because they can be small, local, and hard to realize on the income statement. Revenue effects are messier, but they are also harder to fake. KPMG's analysis of 1.4 million workplace interactions adds useful texture. The highest value users weren't just prompting for answers, they were using AI as a reasoning collaborator, framing problems, iterating, and steering the model's thought process. That matters because it pushes against two bad narratives at once. One is hype that assumes the tool is automatically transformative, the other is dismissal that treats weak results as proof the technology is shallow. If value depends heavily on teachable usage patterns, then organizational ROI is neither magic nor mirage. It's a management and training problem. On the history side, Anthony Caldelis's argument is blunt. The so-called Byzantine Empire was the Roman Empire, according to its own rulers, subjects, and many contemporaries. Byzantine is a later label that creates a rupture the historical actors themselves did not recognize. The strongest part of that case is the self-identification evidence. If a state calls itself Roman, preserves Roman law, claims Roman office, and is treated by rivals as a Roman claimant worth contesting, the burden shifts to anyone insisting it was really something else. Why did the relabeling happen? Caldelis argues Western Europeans had incentives to downgrade the Eastern Empire as merely Greek in order to weaken its Roman claim. That doesn't mean every modern historian is acting ideologically. It does mean the category itself was born inside a political dispute, not neutral description. A lot of Rome's continuity story is fiscal before it's cultural. Caracalla's edict in 212 extended citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants. That expanded the tax base and widened the pool of people eligible for imperial office. Within a generation, provincials could plausibly rise inside imperial structures. Diocletian then built a more regular census and tax system. The important point isn't that late Roman taxation was gentle. It often wasn't. The point is that predictable extraction funded standing armies, administration and public works, and emperors actively fought exemptions because exemptions hollow out states from the top. That helps explain the divergence between West and East better than civilizational clichés do. The West lost tax-rich provinces, relied more on foederati, and was geographically fragmented. The East kept Egypt's grain, stronger naval capacity, and Constantinople, which was both defensible and symbolically a new Rome. Constantine's support for Christianity also fits this statecraft lens. Even if personal belief mattered, bishops were a useful elite network that could reinforce imperial coordination without fielding private armies. By Justinian's time, the Corpus Juris Civilis turned centuries of Roman law into a standardized code. That was scholarship, but it was also power. Uniform law makes empire legible to itself. Its later influence on civil law systems shows how Roman continuity outlived Roman territory. Even the palace politics fit the pattern. Emperors faced real danger, with a remarkable share removed violently. That instability was destructive, but it also rewarded rulers who stayed responsive. If petitions are heard, laws are public, and administrative corruption stays comparatively contained, legitimacy becomes part of state capacity, not just court propaganda. That's the thread running through all of this. Systems survive when identity, incentives, and infrastructure line up well enough to hold under stress. Thanks for listening to Podkey Slopcast. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.